Deep in the woods, shrill voices inhabited the twilight, meaningless sounds from unfamiliar tongues. A voyeur in the right place, at the wrong time, lays eyes upon the scene from the bushes. Weathered old hags streaking into the night, dancing around a fire. One held the limp form of an abortion by the ankle, swirling it in a circle above her head, casting it into the fire. Orange sparks jumped from the heap and fell dim to the dirt. Their high-pitched wails altered the strange, guttural tones. They cried out in unison, chanting forbidden words. Thomas started his day with dreams of good sport and securing meat for the winter. Hunting was more than a hobby or a pastime, it was his life. All of his meals were based off his success in the wild. Watching this spectral spectacle was the last way he wanted to spend his trip. He wanted very badly to run, yet he felt locked into the place, terrified that the slightest breath or movement might draw attention towards him. Their chants grew louder. It seemed as if a choir surrounded him, hitting notes in a strange concerto. All of a sudden, he had the strange sensation that the crowd doubled around him. A low demonic tone joined in on the choir, with a layer of response words to their chants. They broke out into wild convulsions before slitting their own throats all at once to the beat of the drums. He couldn't see their source. It was confusion coupled with anxiety that forced its way into his thoughts. Trembling, he now knew what songs demons sing. Their malevolent melodies and reticulated rhythms never stopped. The wrinkled, necrotic cadavers were singing, no less lifelike than they did when they were in motion. Death grinned, staring up into the gulfs of space from decapitated heads. It left him terrified as he realized their attention was on him. He couldn't contain the fear any longer. He ran like a panther was on his heels, nearly missing trees in his path. His muscles started to ache and his heart begged for a break. He pushed himself, remembering the demonic voice in crystal clarity. He expected to hear the horrifying voice once more, but instead he heard passing vehicles just ahead on the trail. He closed the last 100 feet between him and the freeway. He looked to the left and saw nothing, and to his right, further down the road, was his truck, parked where he left it, but his eyes were locked onto the woods. He couldn't see them, but he felt their eyes watching him. As he reached his door, a severed head smacked the roof of his car. The dead eyes left on his and screamed a blood-curdling scream. He was in his car and blazing down the freeway before he could process the situation, trying to expel the intrusive thoughts from his mind. The meaningless chants and guttural language squeezed all peace from his brain. His vision tunneled on the passing cars that became streams of light to his vision. Their satanic prayers were omnipresent and unforgettable. He saw the dying neons of a bar coming up to his left. Lubricating his senses was a must. He felt compelled to stop. He walked into the hole in the wall and seated himself at the bar. Only 2 patrons were in his company. One passed out on the table. The other brought Thomas a shot he graciously accepted. Out of the one window present in the pub, he saw the sun lost its luster, darkening into the night. Even with liquid courage, he felt he was too close to the woods, that by now anything following him could be on his trail. He had a sinking feeling that the woods were reaching for him with their branches, searching the ground with its root system to snatch him below the floor. The bartender noted his weird perspiration and troubled expression. "I'm guessing you ain't wearing that camouflage for fashion. These woods ain't no sport for hunters around here. They're unkind. I can't imagine you found anything worth catching, did you?" Thomas looked up wordlessly. His curiosity piqued and hunger for answers and obviously some food. He told the bartender, "I saw something I don't think I was supposed to see." The bartender looked sympathetic. "There's things older than God back there, boy. Rumor is the trees themselves are alive. More than 20 people go missing there each year, yet people come anyway. There's supposedly some cult living out there. Some call them the Order of the Moth. I don't want to be superstitious, but I've seen some things too, stranger, and I don't recommend you go back in those woods." Thomas, a non-religious man with a little superstition, didn't have to strain his reality to believe the man. After what he witnessed, the man's words did little to add to the weirdness. The bartender poured him a double shot, and he threw it back and he left for his truck. For a long moment he sat smoking a cigarette, looking across the street to the ominous trees. He thought he could hear them laughing. Dancing shadows moved in the abyss, taunting him. He imagined the twigs at the end of the branches as fingertips pointing at him, groping for him. The shrill voices were laughing and mocking Thomas. He put his car into gear and drove until he got into his town. He knew this wouldn't just go away. He had to find more answers, to at least soothe his madness and calm his nerves down. He had always been a logical man, thinking things through with basically his talent. Strategy was his hobby. That's why he took so easy to hunting. All the factors: wind, moisture, noise, position, heart rate, and body odor. Just a few in the list of necessities for hunting which he had taken pride in. He knew of an old bookstore in town and thought that would be a good place to start. Old Abernathy doesn't get too many people in the visit nowadays. I'm sure he wouldn't decline my inquisition. The musky odor of the pages washed over him in the labyrinth of books. Abernathy lifted one white eyebrow. Surprised to see Thomas, his expression remained fixed. Stomach and leathery seasoned with wizened kindness. Thomas gave a quick and polite head nod and started browsing the books. Fiction, non-fiction, history, geology, until he reached the section that he was looking for. Esoteric and religious manuscript. He saw many familiar books: the Bible, the Quran, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Mysteries of the Worm, and the Necronomicon. All paperback, half fiction, half esoteric beliefs. A book most would pass over, and this collection called to him. He heard whispers and unintelligible speech that spoke blasphemies in his ear. He shunned the voices and fingered through the rows of books. There it was, a beaten leather-wrapped book with a skull and a moth. In brown liquid inscribed across the top, bold handwritten letters said, "Order of the Moth." He gathered a few more books from the collection for reference and to dilute suspicion in his interest. He had a feeling this book had few people looking over it. He placed his money on the counter and bantered with the former librarian. The old man either didn't notice the book or didn't show a reaction to it. He left silently with polite words and headed straight to a nearby diner. The hour was late and he had no intention of sleep, so instead he consumed coffee by the cup. Poring over the pages over the next 3 hours, he read every book multiple times. He had an understanding and a foundation for their ideology. In the other books he found related scriptures and imagery. He came to this conclusion: the Order of the Moth was an esoteric cult. They worship a god they claim to be older than the known universe. It is said that God himself feared this creature so terribly that it was the reason he said, "Let there be light." Human sacrifice was one of their main rites and rituals. They offered human blood to placate the ancient god. At the end of one of these entries stuck together, 2 worm-eaten pages got his attention. He peeled them apart and a small piece of parchment floated to the table. It smelled of rotten meat with reddish-brown letters on the parchment. He unconsciously read the words out loud, trying to sound them out. On the very last word, he felt the world shift. He lost a piece of himself in the utterance of each syllable. His mind was warped and contorted to the words. He slammed the book shut along with all the noise. Dead silence fell on his senses. So quiet, the effects were dizzying. He looked around at the emptiness at the diner. Not even the sound of clinking cups and silverware. As if all life and sound just dropped from existence. The colors rushed back at once in one jolt, causing him to pass out. 7 hours later, he came to in a hospital bed, delighted to know that his last vision was only a hallucination. That minor feeling was soon dashed by the onset of a migraine. It was like an ice pick to the forehead. Rubbing his temples, he confirmed his suspicions. No sooner than he got done examining his wounds, a nurse knocked politely. "Come in," he croaked. "Hey Thomas, I'm Nurse Pam and I'll be your attending nurse for the night. We're a little short-staffed, but if you ring, I'll come. Thomas, do you know why you're here?" "That's right, you passed out. Do you have a history of these kind of episodes?" The rest of her questions followed suit. He answered politely but begrudgingly. Once she was gone and the lights were dimmed, his headache lightened its load on his stressed mind. One word sat on his psyche, forcing its way into every random thought that he tried generating. Caucatus. When he said the word out loud, he felt an answer crawling beneath his skin. Every fiber of his body was magnetically drawn to the window. He slid his legs over the edge and plopped them onto the floor, dragging his IV rack squeaking across the floor. He looked down to see a naked, genitalless masculine form, faceless. The empty head lifted up to him. A blood slit began to form where its mouth should have been. The peeling flesh split and tore away, revealing pointed, dripping fangs, hundreds of them. He fell to the ground, still clutching the IV holder. It clattered to the ground along with him. From every corner and space in the room came a curse of whispers. Caucatus. He screamed, but no sound left his voice box. He slowly sunk into darkness, awakening to the sunlight piercing the blinds. He tore the IV out of his arm and yanked off his gown, retrieved his clothing from the bedside desk and got dressed. He left the hospital without a single word. Looking for his car in the parking lot, he realized it must have been impounded. Fuck, fuck, fuck! He slammed his palm against his forehead, cursing himself. Conveniently, not 20 feet away was an unsecure bicycle. Regardless of the fact that he hasn't ridden one in years, he discovered the old saying held true. He pedaled out of the driveway on his 2-hour ride home. Along the way, traveling the only road from the hospital, the tree line to his right pulled at him. He almost thought that he felt his clothing being tugged in its direction. He steeled his nerves and locked his head forward, refusing to give it attention. The more he forced his vision on the road, the more weird shadows in his peripherals beckoned his gaze. His mental fortitude was astounding. He pedaled through, aching in muscles that haven't gotten use in years. He knew that if it wasn't for the IV, they would have cramped on him. He took comfort in this small victory, using it to fuel his last few yards. Damn near ghost riding the bike, he let it crash into his porch, wasting no time to get into his study and Google. It didn't take long, even with the 10 misspellings. He found the word used in Dante's Inferno. Cocytus, it was a river in Greek mythology that is said to flow through the underworld, in the realm of Hades. It is one of the 5 rivers in the underworld associated with the punishment of the wicked, and said that those who commit heinous crimes for betrayals are sent to its frozen depths. None of this connected to the cult, though. No mention was made of the Order of the Moth. He went deep down the rabbit hole, and hours later, well after the sun fell from the sky, he found a reference that led him to a newspaper article, Cult Suspected and Bizarre Weather Phenomena. Local authorities are investigating a group that calls itself the Order of the Moth, which is believed to be responsible for a series of strange events that have affected the weather and caused concern among the populace. The cult, which is said to be associated with sorcery and worship strange alien gods, has been linked to reports of unusual cloud formations, sudden storms, and unexplained lightning strikes in the area. According to witnesses, members of the Order of the Moth have been seen performing arcane rituals in remote locations. These rituals are said to involve sacrifices of animals and possibly humans. So far, their motives defy explanation. Some residents have reported hearing strange chanting and seeing eerie lights in the sky during these events. The authorities have not yet confirmed any direct connection between the cult and the weather phenomena. They have not ruled out the possibility either, though. "We are investigating all leads and taking this matter very seriously," said Sheriff Merrill Thompson. "The cult, which is believed to have a small but dedicated following, has not issued any statements or responded to requests for comment. However, some experts in the fields of religion and psychology have speculated that the Order of the Moth may be a dangerous group that possesses a threat to public safety. These kind of cults often attract vulnerable individuals who are searching for meaning or a sense of belonging," said Dr. Rachel Murphy, a professor of sociology at the University of Michigan. As the investigation continues, residents are advised to stay alert and report any suspicious activities to the authorities. Along with this article was the crime scene photo of a mutilated corpse. So badly desecrated there was no way to tell if it was male or female. The thing that did stand out were the markings on its flesh. He recognized some of them from the book. He turned around to retrieve it from the desk he set it on to find a puddle of black mucus in its place. He jolted from his seat, sent the chair flying across the room. Bubbles formed on its surface, bursting into black raindrops. He ran from the room and came to a dead stop in the hallway. In every window, malnourished, deflated forms in white robes circled the property. He found every window to have the same forms peering in at him. He saw eyes like sparkling water under the cloaks. He scrambled up the stairs, snatching his dresser drawer open. Retrieving the concealed pistol, he checked the clip and he cleared the chamber. When he made it back to the bottom of the stairs, no shapes glided across his windows. Terrified he had a concussion and this was another hallucination, he ran to his porch to inspect the stained wooden planks. He was frightened stiff as he found bloody footprints on the ground, hundreds of them, and he followed their trail. All of them led to a nexus point at his back porch, leaving another trail leading to the woods behind his house. His sleepy neighbors were none the wiser. He stood confused and aggravated. These feelings fought back to fear, for now. The place that he loved so much was now a nightmare land. Back inside, looking up at all of his mounted trophies, he knew what had to be done. He had evidence enough from the pages he read in that unholy book. Thinking back to the article that he just read, his fears were reawakened by the clash of thunder. A wall of rain flooded his entire neighborhood in one torrential downpour. If this was not enough, peculiar colors of lighting flashed across the sky. What started as thunder slowly morphed into a voice. He couldn't make out the words, but he did feel their meaning. It was an invitation. Instead of letting his fear consume him, he decided to let it guide him. Following the bloody footsteps into the wooded trail, he let his hunter's instincts kick in. The canopy shielded him from the worst of it, but the ground was absorbing the moisture from the heavy rainfall. Every footstep took an added effort of pulling his foot from the muck. He trudged forward, coming almost knee-deep into the forming lagoon. No more tracks to guide him. They were washed away in the rain. He had to rely on his fear and his instinct. The deeper into the woods that he got, he went from feeling like an apex predator tracking its prey to an unsuspecting mouse awaiting a serpent's snare. In between flashes of lightning, shapes started coalescence in a solid substance. The ruins of an altar were plainly visible in his path. Now struggling through waist-deep sludge, he threw his arms onto solid ground, lifting himself out. He fell to his back, panting in exhaustion. The gibbous moon swayed behind the trees above him. A streak of lightning bolted across the sky. He lifted himself up to a sitting position, looking ahead. Between two pillars on the altar, there was an expanse. The mouth of some cavern. He knew answers were in that cavern. Another loud explosion of thunder followed a devastating lightning strike, exploding on impact with a nearby tree. This caused an unfortunate chain reaction. A fire began to spread in its base to all the other trees around, turning the woodlands into the top of a birthday cake. Fire climbing up the bark, blazing in the tree's canopy. The earth started to shake beneath his feet, knocking loose rocks from the pillars around. A wet thud against the rain-soaked dirt brought up to his attention. A broken, lifeless heap sat in an expanding pool of blood. It sunk into the soil. Thomas swore it seemed like the earth itself was vampiric, drinking in the blood soaking in its surface. Another loud thwack followed by another. He quickly realized they were falling to their death from the cliff face. He looked up to see the featureless mannequin man looking down with its wide grin, while people stepped off to their death next to him, plummeting to the mud and the stone. It was salivating at the sight of Thomas. He felt his skin crawl, mentally prepared himself for the possibility of death, and without any further hesitation plunged into the cavern. Between the claustrophobic walls, he squirmed through the crease. Insects on the ceiling scattered away, and fungi on every surface began to glow. The further that he went, the more he could make out the sound of the voices. They became clearer by the footstep. It was clear the sound had become. He came to an antechamber on a rock ring that turned into a spiraling walkway. Thoughts of traversing it were interrupted by sudden silence. He peeked over the edge to see a semicircle of bowing heads. They wrapped like a crescent moon in front of an engraved image of some primordial demon. In the center of the worshippers, a void began to manifest. Starting as a pinprick growing into a whirlpool of shadows, he heard the screams of a woman. She was being dragged to the center violently by her hair. She fought back ferociously. Thomas thought of helping, but he was too far up the spiral to make it down in time. So for the second time in his life, in less than 72 hours, he watched another soul depart from this plane. And not the way that most of us do. She was literally torn from our realm, thrown in the gap between space and time, and fed to some otherworldly entity. Bones crunching and pleased sounds of sated hunger filled the chamber. The cult started to wail, loud and obnoxious, as if they had witnessed some great tragedy, but tears of happiness flowed down their cheeks. The earth shook once more, but this time he felt like the earth's mantle was being jolted. Thomas slipped slightly and knocked rocks over the edge. His heart had sunk, and all eyes fixated on him. He turned around to flee, only to find that the gap had been sealed. In a panic, he started to back up, nearly stepping off the edge before he caught himself. Looking up, it seemed to him like the ceiling sketched infinitely into the heavens, giving contrast to the hole that they summoned below. He was sure it wasn't hell, but he had a feeling it was worse. He drew his gun and lowered it to the person nearest the altar. He pulled the trigger, splattering brains all over the other cultists. His second shot missed. His third struck another below the ribs. He doubled over, falling into the abysmal whirlpool, which was now raging and rotating counterclockwise. A scaly black, taloned hand lifted from the pit, slamming on the stone floor, followed by another one splintering the altar's foundation. Stone broke loose from above, falling into the hole. This sparked an idea, and not a good one, but an idea nonetheless. He checked his clip. He still had 4 shots left. He spent 3 on the last worshippers in the circle, stopping their chance before they reached a crescendo. The collapse was imminent. Every flat surface spidered with cracks and fissures. freeing up large chunks of stone that shattered on the ground and splattered corpses they fell on. Thomas knew that there was no escape, and he didn't know why it had to be him, but he was glad it was. Cancer was going to take him anyways. This hunting trip was supposed to be his last in good health. He planned on bagging a grizzly or something big. His plans to go out with a bang didn't go totally awry. He took his own life with his last round, stopping the ritual. The world would never know who saved it, nor would he be the last to do so. The order has lasted for hundreds of years and will one day return to its former glory. But until that day comes, we await for the unforeseen end. A single moth flew away from the collapsing structure, and one would swear that it resembled Thomas.